So if you clicked on this video, you're probably wondering how long should you cut your wood to make firewood. I feel like it is something that's of a personal preference. Unless you're selling it, then you are kind of catering to a market. Down here in the South, generally what you're going to find is that a lot of people who have wood burning chimneys are going to have smaller chimneys. For that reason, and we don't sell our firewood, but we're starting to get to the point where we have a lot of excess firewood. Most of the time we use our firewood for burning purposes. You know, we can use some wood from around the ranch, but a lot of times the trees and yard cleanup that we're doing has poison ivy in it, so we're just trying to burn that and keep our distance. But when it comes to having a nice fire for roasting marshmallows with the kids, that's generally when we will use our firewood. But if I were to sell it down here, people tend to have smaller chimneys. So the chimney width, I know the chimneys in our house were originally only 16 inches wide, and then they kind of like spread out to maybe 18 inches. That is one thing to consider when you're dealing with natural wood. I would go a little smaller than I would on a gas log set. So I would typically down here maybe try and keep the wood cut somewhere between 10 and 14 inches. If you're new to splitting wood, you don't have wedges or splitters, and you don't have a good splitting maul, then just sticking in that 10 to 12 inch range is going to make it easier to split your wood. Or if you're trying to split up some fresh wood before it really has a chance to dry out, that 10 to 12 inches is going to help out a lot. But at the same time, you might find that there's a good market for wood that's between 12 and 16 inches in length. And so you'd want to cut your pieces to that length. You're going to have to let it dry a little longer before you split it, unless you have a nice splitting maul or you have the splitting wedges. That's not that big of a deal. You really should be letting your firewood dry out to the point of having very low moisture content anyway. And then up north, you probably have people who desire longer lengths. I don't know how long those would be, but I would say that eventually you're going to get to a length of wood that is difficult to split. So in a short answer, I like to do them, right now I've been doing them between 10 and 12 inches. Sometimes I'll do a grouping that's closer between 14 and 16 inches, but I don't ever really go over about 16 inches in length when I'm splitting wood. That is all the criteria that I have for splitting wood, is just thinking about the size of the fireplaces I'm trying to cater to, and then how easy it is to split. Obviously, the shorter pieces are a little easier to split. But then again, I think once you get much below 10 inches, it starts to become hard to split again. It's something about the wood that's just having some length to it makes it easy, and but not too long. When it comes to storing wood before I split it, I like to stack it like I am here. I do that for a couple of reasons. If I let it sit out all over the ground, things are going to grow up in between it, and it's very difficult to maintain the wood pile when things are growing up out of the ground all over it. And down here in the South, we have a lot of snakes. This right here is going to be a habitat for some sort of snake in the next few months, and that's just the reality of it. So what I try and do is find a spot for my wood pile. I put a year-round ground clear down, so there's grass down here now, but because I just started this pile, that's going to die off, and nothing's really going to grow where this wood pile is. By stacking it, I'm allowing air to pass through all the logs. They're going to continue to dry out, and then as I split it, it's going to be a lot easier. The drier the wood, I find the easier it is to split, or the older the wood. So by stacking it and letting the air pass through it, that seems to be the best scenario for me. I know that I've seen a lot of people leave just big logs sitting out with one end towards the ground. I don't think that dries it out as quickly as stacking it does, so I wouldn't recommend that. Generally, with some of those bigger logs, that's where the longer 16, 18 inch cuts could be more beneficial, just because you've got this larger piece. As it dries out, it's going to start cracking in the heart of the wood, which will make it pretty easy to split. with the larger pieces, sometimes it's just not worth handling the little 10 to 12 inch cuts. But yeah, so if you're looking to split wood and you're trying to figure out, well, what are my lengths for cutting it, I just start off with thinking about, are you selling it? Are you using it for yourself? What's the size of your chimney? What's the average size of a chimney in your market, or at least the area that you're selling your wood in, and cut it to cater to that length. Obviously, if you're in an area where people have huge fireplaces, you might not be able to cut the wood that you need by hand to a 24-inch log. I mean, if you had the right equipment, I suppose it wouldn't be that difficult. But I think that when it comes to splitting and drying it, the shorter is easier. The other thing about the shorter lengths, keeping them under 16 inches, is that the wood itself is going to dry faster. The wood kind of goes through a drying process. The second you cut it and you open up both ends, it's going to start drying. The longer that piece of wood is, the longer it's going to take it to dry out. I will say that something else that you should take into consideration is how you're storing the wood. So wood that's cut, this is a little small right here, but it was a larger piece of a log that I was trying to cut up. So sometimes you're just going to end up with whatever length you have when you cut it. I will say that the longer pieces, the 14 to 16 inch pieces, are easier to stack. You're not going to have as easy of a time stacking wood that is too small in length, because you're not going to be able to stack it very high before the pile starts falling over. You could double up the rows, but nothing is ever that even. And that's another consideration, is how you're going to store the wood prior to burning it or selling it. Getting pieces that are cut more in that 14 or 12 to 16 inch range versus 12 and under range is going to be a lot easier to stack.